Well, at the research chair in media education and human rights, we really are working on the analysis, on the development, and also an assessment of public policy on media education, while we are also examining educational practices in school and in community settings. Now, at our chairs, we believe in the power of asking some very naive and basic questions. Those are productive questions. Like, what truly defines the core of media education as a practice and as a field of study? What do we know about it in 2018, and what still we don't know about it? Well, as you know, scholars still disagree about the very substance of what we call media education, about its goal and about the core processes. But I really think it's fair to say that the thing that we call media education is a term that we use to address all the teaching and all the pedagogical practices that are aimed at developing specific media competencies and teaching on the media, and that these competencies and that knowledge is supposed to be addressing some core issues and some core needs around social, cultural, economic, and political needs and problems surrounding media. Now, for me, when we are looking at media education as an object of study, it really requires that we look at 5 different things. And these are theoretical knowledge, of course, and you're all struggling with that in your PhD. We also need to look at policy, what we do with media education at the policy level. We need to look at teaching practices as they are implemented in school, but also in community setting and in family settings. We need to look at the competencies that are ought to be developed, and we also need to look at the social, economic, political, or cultural objectives that are associated with what we call the media. Now, and scholars have been doing this quite well over the last 40 years. And a lot of energy has been invested in defining the conceptual and theoretical roots of media education. Right now, as we speak, policy studies on media education are booming. And there are countless articles, books, and book chapters, and expert reports on the media competencies and how they relate to our problem and needs with regard to the media. But what we've not been so proficient at is really articulating these dimensions one to another in a coherent manner, each to be considered as a link of a chain. We need to look further at how abstract knowledge informs policy, and how policy is deployed in teaching environment, and how teachers are appropriating policy objectives and translating those policy objectives into concrete pedagogical activities, and with what kind of result. And this is what I call articulation. And I believe that policy is a great entry point to look at this idea of articulation and to reconstruct the chains, to move forward into looking at how those 5 core dimensions of media literacy education play one to another. And as you know, school curricula are really at the heart of education policies. They establish educational priorities, they define disciplinary orientations, they assign responsibility to teachers and directions and other professionals. And they also define evaluation measures. So it is really surprising how little we still know about these central documents when we are talking about media education. And without a deep and sophisticated knowledge of curricula, how can we answer the following questions? What are the skills, knowledge, competencies, and attitude that is sought by a school system in relationship with the media? How do these achievements relate one to another and in relation to the concept of literacy? And what discourses, what arguments are conveyed in curricula about the thing that we call the media, and especially the relationship that media have with children and teenagers? What is the integrative logic of distributions of media education content in the curriculum? And what analysis can be drawn from this distribution of media education content in the curriculum? Because this brings specific responsibility for specific teachers in school, and it is incredibly important that we have a clear idea of where we can find content in the curriculum. Now, in 2014, highlighted my the rather surprising realization that it is actually media education delivered in school as part of regular education that is the real uncharted spot on the map of media education, and I totally agree with that. Our knowledge about curriculum, content, and media education really remain patchy and incomplete, and this situation precludes a critical analysis of the quality of the content of media education found in curriculum, of course, but also the linkage with the scientific knowledge and the practices that are deployed by professionals in the field. Now, being critical is easy. It's really comfortable also. But trying to fix the shortcomings of our field is actually quite difficult. And this is what we've been trying to do in Quebec. And I believe that we did find a way to proceed to a systematic and scientific analysis of our curriculum with regard to media education. And I'm here now today to present our methodology, what we found. Hopefully you can import some of these ideas in your own work, but it is by no way a perfect process, and perhaps I can take your suggestions in order to improve our methods and make it stronger also. Now, curricula are quite complex documents. They are each unique, and they are each unique to their specific jurisdiction. But they have a number of things in common, right? And when we look at them for media education content, we should at least look at 3 different things. And these are discourses, prescriptions, and goals. Now, discourses are unsupported affirmations that define stuff, like what is a media? Like what is the relationship between media and teenagers and children? Like what are the needs and the problems of society or school with regard to the media? And discourses are legitimations for our next point, and these are prescriptions. Now, curricula are full of prescriptions, and prescriptions are things that categories of actors have to do. Like teachers should be developing the critical thinking habit of their students. Like students should be able to produce media content. Like schools should be able to provide a safe media environment for youngsters, right? So these are prescriptions. And finally, each curricula contains goals. And goals are the objectives. They can be of cognitive, social, cultural, or economic nature. And they are derivative of the prescriptions, and they are informed by discourses. So now you have 3 things. You have discourses, you have the prescriptions, and then you have goals. And taken together, they are constitutive of a lot of stuff that we will find in curricula with regard to media education. But there's also 2 other things to be found in curricula. The first one is the precise anchoring of media education content. You have to ask yourself, in what disciplines, in what topic is media education inserted, right? And to which extent. But then you need to move further ahead. You need also to have a clear overview of the integrative logic of the distribution of media education content amongst different disciplines, right? Is media education a transversal theme? Is it something specific to a specific disciplines? This is so important because the distributive logic and the integration of media education content in the curriculum bring specific prescriptions for specific teachers. What do math teachers, science teachers, language teachers have to do with media education in the curriculum? What training do they have? How do they integrate media education in their training, right? In their teaching, sorry. And you see how important having a clear idea of the distribution of media education content in the curriculum is when we are talking about work conditions and training and how it is actually translated into concrete pedagogical practices. But there's one more thing to consider. It is also very important. Now that you have identified all media education content, now that you know which part are discourses, prescriptions, and goals, now that you know where are these content extracted from, you still need something else. You still need to associate these content with media education competencies. And why do you need to do that? Because only when you have a clear idea of the way media literacy is conceptualized in these documents, will you be able to make a systematic and scientific assessment of how media literacy is deployed in the curriculum. And then you will be able to do something else. You will be able to make a clear critical appreciation of its orientation, its weaknesses, its strengths, and even its failings. Now, in order to do this, and we'll go back to this a little bit later, you will need a media competencies matrix, and you will need clear and clearly defined indicators that you will need to use in order to classify specific content into media education competencies. And this is how we did for the Quebec education program. Now, the Quebec education program is a total mess. It's more than 4,000 pages of text, it's 87 documents, it's 3 different cycles, it's highly complicated, it's highly resisted by school teachers. So looking at this really got me a few gray hair, but at the same time it was a needed work. Now in Quebec, the goal of media education, the curriculum, is really to develop the student critical and ethical thinking regarding media and to present them with opportunities to produce media works that respect individual and collective rights, right? And this includes 4 areas of development. Students should be able to develop their awareness of the role and influence of media in their daily life and in society. They should have an appreciation of media. They should have an appreciation of media representation of reality. They should be able to appropriate media communication materials and codes. And finally, they should have a knowledge and a respect of individual and collective rights and responsibilities with regard to the media. So how do we proceed? Well, it's a 4-stage process. The first stage is perhaps the most important one. You will need to drink coffee, a lot of it, and very strong coffee, because this stage is very boring. You need to read the whole complete curriculum, the 4,000 pages. You can't accept it. You need to read the whole thing because you need to appropriate the content, the language, and the logic of these documents. It is really essential that you take the time to reflect and read those documents as a whole. And I read it as a whole. And in your reading, you will make connections and you will take note. Please take note of everything. Your frustration, the ambiguities, the questions that you have, the stuff that you don't understand. These questions, I can tell you, are right on the point. If you're not happy with the text, it's because there's something probably wrong with the text. You have something to grasp over there. So please take a lot of note in that reading. And then you will need to, and this is very, very important, and we'll go back to this later on, underline each word related to media education or media as a whole. ICTs, technology, digital, all those keywords, underline them, all of them. And I can assure you that this first unstructured reading is highly productive, even though it doesn't appear that way. Stage 2. Now that you have read the whole curriculum, right, you will need to regroup and organize all the 87 documents into a qualitative analysis software, and in our case, in vivo. And each curriculum has its own architecture, right? Its way of organizing contents among disciplines. You will need to organize your document in a way that reproduces finally these architectures. Now, during your reading, you have read the whole thing, you will find something very important. Curricula are incredibly ambiguous in their nature. It will be often impossible for you to have a clear idea if a given text is an expectation, a prescription, a goal, or a suggestion. It's okay. It's okay. And if you try to classify content by inferring the intentions of the curriculum drafter, you will fail, as I did, right? Your coding will be subjective, reflecting your own understanding of the text and not what the text is saying, right? And you don't want that. What you want is objective categories of classification. And we have proposed 5 of them for our own work. discourses, action verb, object of learning, actors, and site of extractions. Let's see each of them very quickly. Well, discourses are unsupported assertion supporting the curriculum to legitimize it and orient its prescriptions. And here's a few quotes. It is said in our curriculum that the media are numerous, ubiquitous, and diverse, that they occupy a large space in the daily life of our children, and they represent an important dimensions of their cultural universe. It is also said that elementary level children should also be amazed and fascinated by the media productions, but they are still better equipped to reflect on them. And when children start school, many of them already display skills in using ICTs that make any initiation activity unnecessary, right? I can disagree with nearly everything that is there. So this is discourse, and it's so important because that kind of discourse will then frame the prescriptions that are inserted in the curriculum. Now in our work, we found 8 major categories of discourses at the left column, and all the subcategories of discourses that comes with the larger categories. Second thing, action verb. Action verb are stuff that category of actor, whether student, teacher, school, parents, should do or should be able to do with an object of learning, right? Like for school, school is invited to develop the student critical and ethical sense of the media and give them opportunity to produce media documents that respect individual and collective right. It must also help the student develop a critical sense of the ICTs and play a role in mitigating the digital gaps of those who still don't have access to ICTs at home. And interestingly, this thing contradicts the last discourse on the fact that children already are initiated to ICTs. Right? In our work, we found that students should be able to accomplish 99 different actions with regard to media and ICTs at the primary level only. So this raises a number of questions. 99 different actions. Who's responsible for providing them with the tools in order to accomplish all those actions? Do teachers have the training and the resource and the tool needed for doing their job? When you have a clear idea of the action verb, you have a clear idea of the expectation of a given category of actors. And then object of learning. Objects of learning are the things upon which action verbs have to be applied to, right? Students should learn to assess what? The place and role of media in their daily lives and in society. And they also should become aware of what? Of the influence of media on their personal values. They should also be able to distinguish what? The different type of media, right? So object of learning are the things upon which action verbs have to be applied to. Oops. In our work, we found out 145 different objects of learning for the primary education program at all. So this brings also another question. What understanding do teachers have of all those stuff? Because the influence of media on their personal values or the place and role of media in their daily lives in society is quite a complicated object of learning, right? What do teachers understand about their role and place in providing students with the means to have a clear assessment of the place and role of media in society and in daily life? Now, actors and extraction sites. Well, I mean, this is perhaps the most easiest ones. Actors are the categories of actors that are accomplishing the action verbs. Like teachers should help students learning to respect individual property, but school should provide access to ICTs. And finally, extraction sites are the precise location in a given curriculum from which a given coded text is taken from, right? From mathematics, history, you can find a specific place in it. So you see that there's very, very little subjectivity here. And what we did is that we extracted text from curricular document and we classified them in these 5 categories. And as these categories fit up with content, we created subcategories, and we regroup it together, these courses, action verb, and object of learning. But let's go back to you guys. You have organized curricular document in your software. You have prepared this large category of classifications. What you need to do now is go back to your notes, and you remember all the media-related keywords that I told you that you really need to underline. Well, now you have to compile them into a one integrated list. Because these keywords will be the mesh of a net that you will be using in order to make research into your document and find all the curricular content with regard to media education. Each of these keywords will really serve as a net of mesh, right? And as these keywords will be used, you will find relevant content, and you will be able to start your abstraction and begin coding. So congrats, you're now ready to code. So you have all your keywords, right? And you inserted them in your software. And then results are generated for each document. And you will need to have somebody looking at those results, and this will need to be a human because there will be noise, and you will have to use your own personal judgment in order to determine which is related to media education and which is not, and why you can make those distinctions. But please have a look at this. You can see now that the action verbs are underlined, right? And the object of learning are in italics. And you can note that just in this small extract, there's 9 different action verb and 9 different object of learning. Now, each of these extracts will need to be coded and classified in each categories. Here, we are talking about actors, we're talking about student. In verb of action, in object of learning, and in the category that reproduce the architecture in your software. Now, I don't want to get too technical here, but perhaps we can discuss this later on if you want. But this is what it produces. Let's have a look at action verb 20 to 23, and I apologize, this is in French. But you can see there that the same action verb, being aware, right, 20 to 23, is associated with 4 different objects of learning: the place and role of media in society, the effect of media language, the influence of media on personal value and on the student worldview. You can also find out precisely here where these content are extracted from. You see that now we're moving forward. I hope so. I hope that you see that we're moving forward. You know that we know now precisely what is expected of each actors in each disciplines in relation with which object of learning. We have a clear representations of the goal of a given curriculum with regard to media education. And this is already so useful. And why? Because with this, you can start a whole new second phase of your research. You can go out and actually meet teachers. You can question teachers about their knowledge of these requirements and their understanding of the requirements and their attitudes toward these prescriptions. You can ask them about how they relate to translate these prescriptions into actual teaching practices. You can ask them about what variable comes into play over the capacity or desire to actually implement these policy recommendations into actual teaching practices. You can ask them how they actually are able to evaluate how students should be aware of the effect of media language on them, right? So you can have some very specific questions. And you can ask them if they have the tool, the training, and the support in order to accomplish their prescriptions. But now, you remember when I first introduced the notion of articulation? With this simple table, you can clarify policy objective and have the tool to inquire about how and to which extent it is implemented in school and why. But it's still not enough. It's still not enough. There is something missing. Is anybody have an idea of what is missing in our articulation? Theory is missing. Theory is missing from this thing. In other words, when we now have a clear idea of the prescriptions, we still don't have a picture of how the curriculum conceptualizes media literacy, right? Or to put it in a different matter, of what media competencies are preferred, where we can find them, and in what weight one to another. So what we need to do now is actually move to stage 4. And this is familiar, I'm sure, to a lot of you guys. So if we want to achieve this, we really have to use a matrix of media competencies rooted in a distinctive theory of media literacy. And what needs to be done here is to clarify all the action verb in association with their object of learning into a matrix of competencies. And in our work, we use the matrix from the Conseil supérieur de l'éducation média, and of course this matrix is based on the work by Pierre Fastrez and Thierry Desmet here. And of course I don't have the time to present them fully, and they are of course much more capable people than me in the room to do so. So if you have questions about the matrix, I would defer to Pierre and Thierry. But as you can see, and perhaps as most of you know, the matrix is organized around 4 different actions and 3 different axes. So the actions are reading, writing, navigating, and organizing, and the axes are informational, technique, and social. So with this matrix, there's 12 categories of media competencies that needs to be distinguished. Now we have nearly 200 units of text to classify, and each of these units of text had to found a home in different categories. So the process of classification has been, I would say, quite rigorous. It has been conducted by 2 research assistants under my direction. It has been verified by myself over and over again. It has been verified by Pierre Fastrez, and then we reviewed the whole thing together at the end. And for each unit of text that we had to classify, we had to establish a classification rules to note it, to verify it, and to modify it if needed, and to classify accordingly. And as we did our classification, we generated a list, a table, showing exactly where in the curriculum these categories of competencies, not the text, but where in the curriculum these categories of competencies could be found, and which unit of text are associated with each of them. And the result looked something like this. I apologize, this is way too small for you to be able to read, but you can see here that you have the 4 verbs, and then you have the 3 different dimensions, and then you can open up each verb and dimensions and see the specific unit of text. And if you move forward, you see the number of times in each discipline where you can find this unit of text, right? So we did generate that. And then at the end, if you go to the right, you have a clear idea of the weight of all different categories of competencies in our curriculum. And you can open up the table and see where are these numbers coming from precisely. Now, why did we do this? What is the gain, right? What is the gain? We know now which of the competencies are inserted where in the curriculum. Not the unit of text, but what kind of competencies are preferred where in a given place in the curriculum. We know the importance of each of these competencies in each discipline and in the overall curriculum. And we know the relative importance of these competencies one to another. More specifically, we know now that nearly all competencies with relationship to organizing are absent from the Quebec curriculum. We know now that competencies relating to reading and writing are twice as important as the competencies related to navigating. We know now that specific disciplines such as history and citizenship educations are evaluating all competencies related with critical thinking in concrete contradiction with the scientific literature. So you see now that theory becomes a tool for critical evaluation of media education policy. And based on this work, we can now speak to policy leaders, right? And have a clear and systematic assessment of media education integration in our curriculum. But perhaps, and more importantly, our work, I believe, allows us to go further in our education agendas. Now, over the course of the last few decades, we have made some amazing progress in nearly all fronts in media education research. But I would say some core dimensions of media education are stronger than another, and I would suggest that we have investigated with a lot of energy this idea of redefining literacies for the digital age and defining curriculum that would meet the challenge ahead. But perhaps we have done so at the expense of what is already here, right? Looking at the actual curricula in place, at the role that school environment plays, both as an enabler and a restrictor of media education practices. And looking at the practices themselves as they are deployed by workers, working in complex work environment with very little incentive, reward, and training. So perhaps in this digital age of global and perpetual media transformations, what needs to be done is not so much looking at the media, but looking at education. And not so much looking at technology, but at the human beings that are working in very complex environment. And this really brings me back to this idea of articulation. And I would like us just to think again, once more, about these core questions. What conceptions of media literacy is inscribed in media education policy? And how is policy implemented in learning environment? By whom? Working in which conditions? Translating policy into what teaching practices is? And with what kind of results that are evaluated how? And I believe it's urgent that we start to organize our research agenda a little bit more around those key questions. Thank you for your time.